We are looking forward our way via Zoom for this episode. Hi, this is Brett. Carol and I had the opportunity to participate in the Ohio Leaders of Encore and Age-Friendly Initiatives webinar focusing on housing laws and options for older adults just recently.
Brett, housing has become a critical issue for all residents in Central Ohio and the nation. However, I'm going to dare to say that housing for our elder citizens needs to be considered a top priority. As you mentioned, we had the opportunity to hear 3 experts on this housing issue. But let me first welcome Noreen Willhelm, Del Mar Encore Fellows Initiative at the Dayton Foundation, who helped to coordinate this program, and she's going to provide us with an overview. Noreen, thank you and welcome.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Brett. It's been a great opportunity to bring in experts to talk about issues of concern to older adults. This is a group that has been meeting for a couple of years just to think about ways that we can collaborate across the state and to explore issues that affect older adults, throughout the state and the U.S. And this time we wanted to talk about housing because, there's a lot of conversation about people aging in place. Do we want to move into senior only housing? And we know that there are alternatives, but we don't all know very much about them. And so we wanted to share some expertise on those issues.
Noreen, before we begin, how did this initiative kind of get together?
About three or 4 years ago, the pandemic makes time sort of mush together, but 3 or 4 years ago, a colleague in Cleveland and I started having a conversation. Lenora Brown was working with the Cleveland Leadership Center, and I was in Southwest Ohio at the Dayton Foundation, both working with active older adults and identifying ways that we were giving back to the community. At the same time, we knew that AARP and at that point, I think probably 14 communities across the state were working on becoming age-friendly communities, which means that they were working with the World Health Organization's framework for making communities viable for people of all ages, And but we knew that we didn't have a means of connecting with each other. Everybody was sort of working in our little silos, some working in government, some people working in philanthropy, some people just as volunteers concerned about their communities. And so we decided that we would get as many people together as we could. And we brought about 40 people together in August of 2019 at the Cleveland Foundation. And there were folks from all across the state doing all different kinds of things and said, what are the issues that we have that overlap, and where are the places that we might be able to work together? And it was just our intent was to start a conversation and to introduce ourselves to each other. Then, of course, the pandemic happened and things slowed down a lot, but we did move to Zoom and have been meeting over since. Actually, just pretty much late 2021, early 2022, meeting via Zoom, bringing in speakers like the deputy director of the Ohio Department of Aging, and then today's experts on housing.
Noreen, that is phenomenal just to have those conversations because you've got the resources. And as you said, we are all siloed. We're all in our own little niche and world and don't see what else is going on. So when we're talking about these housing issues specifically, it is such a complex undertaking because basically there are no foolproof answers on housing. We're all over the place. What did Ohio leaders hope to accomplish in this webinar?
What we brought people to talk about 3 different aspects of housing. One person from the Miami Valley Fair Housing Center was talking about the law as it relates to housing and cities that have begun to look at housing for older adults. We brought in someone talking about an effort to use volunteers to support people aging in place. That neighbors in a community come together in the Villages network to say, how can we it kind of barter our services to support people who want to live at home for as long as possible. And then the third option was talking about Nesterly, which is an effort to connect people with empty rooms in their house with folks who need housing. And what that often means is that an older adult, again, wanting to age at home, has space when their children move out, they lose a spouse, and young people in need of affordable housing will get a discount on housing in exchange for sometimes offering some support to the homeowner. And at the same time, that helps address the issue of social isolation for both older and younger people.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Well, as we get into the webinar, what are some takeaways that you hope that our listeners are going to take from this episode?
We are about ideas, and we want people to be thinking differently about their own communities and where new ideas that they're hearing might be applicable. They might be looking around their own neighborhood and say, oh, volunteers, we have a very, very strong volunteer ethic in our neighborhood. Maybe we could use that to support some of our neighbors. Or others might be thinking about, oh, there are some zoning issues in our community that we could address, whereas somebody else could say, I have a space in my house and I would love to have someone live with me. We just want people to start thinking about new approaches and new developments that could improve the lives of all of us.
Good.
That's wonderful. Noreen, thank you again for providing us with this framework for the program. Listeners, thank you for joining us, and we hope you will enjoy this incredible opportunity to gain more and more information about this issue, and also just recognize the importance of housing for our elderly citizens. That's really the first step.
I'm Noreen Willhelm, and I'm Senior Fellow with the Dayton Foundation's Del Mar Encore Fellows Initiative, and my former colleague, Lenora Brown, and I started organizing these meetings back in pre-COVID days when we could actually meet in person in an effort to bring the Encore and age-friendly leaders together to see if there were issues that we could work on jointly, or if there were issues and trends that we would want to together work to affect it within the state. Lenora has moved out of state. I'm sure not forever, but out of the Encore space. And so I'm thrilled that Chelsea Nichols and Donna Kastner helped to organize today's gathering.
Great. Good morning, everyone. My name is Chelsea Nichols. I work for the City of Westerville. I am the Age Friendly Initiative project manager for the City of Westerville. And I'm going to introduce our presenters this morning, and then we will, as Noreen said, have the presenters give an overview of their topic, and then we will enter into a panel discussion. We have three presenters this morning. We have John Zimmerman with Miami Valley Fair Housing, and he is going to talk about housing and ageism in Ohio. We have Frances Krumholtz with Central Ohio Area Agency on Aging, and she is going to talk about Nesterly Home Sharing app. And Lee Sempelis is from the Institute for Livable and Equitable Communities, and she is going to talk about the Village to Village Network. So we will just jump right into their presentations. John Zimmerman is the Vice President of Miami Valley Fair Housing Center in Dayton, Ohio. He manages education and outreach for the organization, which provides continuing education for realtors, realists, architects, attorneys, social workers, and landlords. He also conducts fair housing workshops for consumers, municipal staff, planning departments, social service, and charitable organizations whose work intersects with housing. He develops fair housing education for social media and other digital platforms. He has a bachelor's degree from the Capital University in Columbus, Ohio, and he resides both in Indiana and Ohio. So I will turn it over to John. Thank you for being here, John.
So today I'm going to talk about housing laws and options for older adults. And I'm going to talk about the Housing for Older Persons Act of 1995 and the design and construction requirements of the Fair Housing Act, and how both of those regulations help us, but also hinder us. And then I'm going to talk about some policy considerations. One policy consideration is going to be visitability. Another one is going to be source of income, protections. And then I want to talk about how municipalities can implement, and actually how they must implement, a policy around reasonable accommodations that not only help people with disabilities, but help the community at large. And then finally, I am going to talk about the obligation that your jurisdiction has to affirmatively further fair housing, and how that we must join in with robust community participation in our 5-year fair housing planning process, which is a requirement of HUD's fair housing regulations for any municipality that receives federal funding. So that's a quick overview. Both the design and construction requirements and the Housing for Older Persons Act help us and hinder us. The creation of 55 and older and 62 and older housing was done through the Housing for Older Persons Act. And that really helped a lot of seniors who, in fact, wanted to live maybe in a segregated housing where there weren't kids and it was quiet and they could sleep late and all of that. But what we've found has happened is that the building industry has capitalized on this and has gone to municipalities and really sold them on building housing, or if there's subsidies that involve, like low-income housing tax credits, sold them on a package that if they either have a preference or have a mandate for building solely housing for older persons, that crime will go down, traffic problems won't happen, all kinds of different things. However, we have found, and I think you're especially going to hear from the other panelists, that there are lots of people who don't want to live in segregated housing. And so that we find that sometimes that, when people want to sell their home and go into multifamily housing, the only thing that's out there might be, housing that is segregated away from families with children. And so that's something that we want people to know. It's important to understand that fair housing laws are governed by protected classes, and age in the United States is not a protected class in housing when it comes to federal laws. However, we have a few local municipalities or states might, protect age, and then that age protection varies. So, for example, in Dayton, Ohio, they protect age, but it's for 40 and over. Whereas in Athens, Ohio, it'll be for everyone 18 and over, like the Equal Credit Opportunity Act. And so municipalities have to be careful so that they don't get into trouble by banning housing for families with children and having exclusively segregated housing, because they could run afoul of the fair housing laws. So you can see it helps us, it hinders us. And so we need to work on those policies around having aging in place in an integrated setting, and have some promotion around that. The design and construction requirements really help a lot of people when they are used. However, unfortunately, they're not used in many cases, because even though any new housing with 4 or more units must have 7 mobility or wheelchair features to it. Building permits can be issued without the building inspector or the building department ever taking a look at the plans. And so sometimes architects and builders just forget about it. No one at the local jurisdiction talks to them about it, and the housing gets built. And then later on, it gets audited. And we've seen housing providers find that they have to do $2.5 million in rehab. And so there are lots of ways that we can do things at the local level and make sure that all housing is built, that is, constructed so that people can age in place. And so to wind up, there are 3 things that that I believe people should look at as policy considerations. One is visitability. Ask yourself, can a person in a wheelchair come to your home and be there for Thanksgiving? Come in, roll in on their own through the front door, and then be there long enough that they could use a bathroom and close the door for privacy. And many of our homes won't allow us to do that. So Pittsburgh has a visitability ordinance, and anyone that wants to make their house more visitable and have like a ground floor entrance and an accessible bathroom can get a $2,500 tax rebate for doing those things. And it applies to people who would buy commercial property that's vacant and they are renovating it. It applies to single family homeowners, people in townhouses, apartments. It's a really great ordinance. Another thing that we see that cities have done that helps not only older persons, but everyone in the community is source of income protections under fair housing laws. And so Columbus added one, and their protections are very, very broad, so that regardless of what someone's income is, they can't be discriminated against. And over my 25 years or so of fair housing, I've heard landlords say, gosh, we don't want to rent to older people because if they get behind on their rent, a lot of times we can't garnish their income if it's, from SSI or, something like that, Social Security. And we really try to reject those applications from older adults. And that is something that is harmful to everyone. These source of incomes also protect anyone, whether they're young or old, who has some type of local subsidy to pay for housing, which a lot of landlords can now join voluntarily, but it becomes a program that they have to accept that source of income. And so those are the things that I can talk about more in depth, and in the breakout sections, I can talk about fair housing planning and how before planning is done, every jurisdiction must have a series of focus groups, interviews, surveys that everyone can be involved in and give their input so that elected officials find out from you, the public, what are the meaningful actions that they need to take over a 5-year period to make housing more accessible. And a meaningful action is one which has a positive material impact. Okay. And so it's not just words. Something has to be built, something has to change, and we have to see a material outcome. So that is an overview of the things that I believe would really help not only older persons, but the community at large, and help people age in place, and especially those who don't want to be segregated.
All right. Thank you, John. Next, we will have Frances Krumholtz. She has served as the volunteer engagement coordinator for Central Ohio Area Agency on Aging for 3 years. In this position, she promotes intergenerational home sharing through Nesterly, Central Ohio, coordinates a Friendly Caller volunteer initiative that provides social support to people in the region, and has developed and launched other programming that focuses on the health and well-being of older adults. Previously, she served as business development and operations coordinator and she has experience shaping development strategies with nonprofit agencies of all sizes. Frances holds a BA from The Ohio State University in sociology and Spanish. She serves on the development committee for Girls on the Run of Central Ohio. And in her spare time, she enjoys volunteering, running, hiking, reading, and travel. So take it away, Frances. Thank you.
Thank you. According to the Ohio Department of Aging, between 2010 and 2030, the number of Ohioans age 60 and older is projected to increase by 33.4%. To give a little context to that number, during that same time period, Ohio's total population is expected to grow by just 0.7%. And by this 2030 year, we expect that Ohioans age 60 and older will make up 26.3% of Ohio's total population. In Central Ohio, which is where I'm located, we're expecting to add another 1 million people by 2050. And in Columbus alone, we're already short 54,000 affordable housing units. So we've got a few ways of meeting this gap. Regional planners estimate that we need to build 14 to 21,000 new units each year. In terms of how we're doing to hit that benchmark, in 2020, we built fewer than 12,000. Unless we blame that on 2020 and the crazy pandemic year that was actually the highest number of units that we had built in a single year in the last 15 years. So another tool that's at our disposal is to use more of the housing that we already have. Columbus has 27,000 spare bedrooms that are in the homes of baby boomers that are not being used currently. So this is where Nesterly comes into play. Nesterly's goal is to make it safe and easy to home share. We've got this huge opportunity to build intergenerational connections while increasing access to affordable housing and also allowing older adults to pursue what we know is overwhelmingly the preference, which is to remain in their long-term home as they age. Excuse me. We're all experiencing rapid cost of living increases, and for folks on a fixed income, this can be even more challenging. Home sharing is a way that we can one tool for easing those financial burdens while also making new friends along the way. So Nesterly Central Ohio is a home sharing platform, and I'll go through briefly kind of how it works. So an interested host can create a profile on Nesterly's website. They'll share a little bit about themselves and their space and why they're interested in home sharing, and they get to control the information that is shared as well as the price of rent. Hosts also have an option to request additional assistance with some light chores around the house in exchange for reduced rent. What we've seen in Central Ohio is that 40% of our home share listings take advantage of this task exchange with an average saving of $122 per month for the guest. When a potential guest is interested in a listing, they'll reach out through Nesterly's website. They've got a built-in chat and even video messaging so that everything can stay organized and in one place. Obviously, when we talk about home sharing, safety and security are really important. It's a big priority for us. The security features that are built into Nesterly are a big reason why Central Ohio Area Agency on Aging chose to partner with them. Nesterly thoroughly vets its users through an application, background checks, references. The home sharing agreement itself is fill in the blank, so it guides users through important conversations prior to move-in, thinking about things like expectations around private space versus shared space, guests, pets, those types of things. Secured and automated payments are also part of the system, as well as ongoing customer support, which is led by social workers. So the Nesterly team is really there for hosts and guests throughout the entire process. So from sign up through the end of the home share. And it is a great resource to know that you've got a team of folks who you can turn to if any issues come up along the way. Home sharing through Nesterly Central Ohio is a win-win-win. Hosts get additional income, guests receive an affordable housing option. Ideally, both parties are going to get the opportunity to develop a friendship that will enrich their lives. intergenerational home sharing with these additional safety features in place makes sense. It's why Age-Friendly Innovation Center, Age-Friendly Delaware, and Age-Friendly Westerville have already included Nesterly Central Ohio in their action plans. I know I saw a couple of questions come in. I will take a peek and see if I can answer those. Actually, I think I've already hit my time. So I'm happy to answer questions during the breakouts, or I think we'll have a little bit of time at the end as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Francis. All right, next we have Lee Sampelis, and Lee is currently a Del Mar Encore Fellow working for the Dayton Foundation and in partnership with the Miami Valley Regional Planning Commission on establishing age-friendly initiatives in Southwest Ohio. As part of the Institute for Livable and Equitable Communities, trained as an attorney and following a career in legal publishing at LexisNexis and Bloomberg LP, Lee has been working in nonprofits for the past decade. She served as the executive director of St. Vincent de Paul in the Dayton community and as the executive director of the Foggy Bottom and West End Village in Washington, D.C. Lee has remained active in the village movement, serving as the president of the board of the Washington Area Villages Exchange, and is currently a member of the board of directors for the Village to Village Network. She earned her BA in history from Wright State University, possesses a master's in management from
Antioch.
Thank you. College, and received her JD from the University of Dayton and is licensed to practice in the state of Ohio. And with that, I'll turn it over to Lee. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Chelsea. I'd like to share with you a housing option called Aging in Place. The Aging in Place models center around research primarily conducted by AARP that says most people, as they get older, want to remain in their homes and communities. So about 20 years ago, in the Beacon Hill area of Boston, a group of friends and neighbors got together and they created what I would call a virtual village. So what is a village? A village is what I would call a volunteer-driven community organization that provides services that enable older adults to live longer and healthier and happier in their homes and communities. A village is what you just heard from Francis, is the timing is really right for the village movement in our country. You saw the aging demographics that Francis just presented. 1 in 5 people in the United States by the year 2030 will be over the age of 65. We are an aging population. Ohio ranks number 14 in the nation in terms of that aging demographic. So the timing is right for these grassroots, self-governing organizations in our community to take root. There's now about 280 villages in 45 states in the United States. There's also villages in about 4 countries. We'll put in the chat the link to the V2V network where there's a map and you can find out if there's a village within your area. There's also about 80 villages that are now in what I would call the exploratory and developmental stage. The villages, members receive their services from volunteers of all ages, and the services provided can be in the home in terms of light housekeeping, yard work, or transportation to and from your doctor's appointments, to the grocery store, pharmacy, that type of thing. Volunteers help with that. Also, the village is a good place to get information or referrals. Many of the villages have a long list of vetted service providers that can help their members in terms of obtaining services. So if you need a tax form filled out, or one villager came to me and said, when I was serving at the village in DC, that they needed a vetted roofer to help them within their home. So they're a good source of resources and referrals. Also, care coordination. If you live alone and you're having hip surgery, and when you come home, you need a little bit of help within your home and also to take you to doctor's appointments. Technology assistance is provided, and we all needed that through the pandemic, and as we were using how to use technology to do telehealth and also Zoom programs and meetings. There's friendly visits, there's walking buddies. Again, when I served in DC as the village director, we were very close to the Kennedy Center. So there was theater almost every night. And so if one of our members perhaps did not want to walk alone, we had volunteers that would walk with them. Volunteerism is a key element of the village. This slide just reinforces the fact that people do want to remain in their homes for the long term. And they also want to be able to make informed choices about how they live and where they live. The village model, I would call it almost an affordable alternative and a creative housing solution, because you do defray the cost, the high cost of assisted living and long-term care services. That's not to say at some point in your life you may need those types of services. The programs the villages focus on, there's a wide variety. I like to call it mind, body, and spirit. The mind is the educational seminars, the speakers that are brought in for the different programs. Body, of course, is fitness classes, meditation, yoga, tai chi, falls prevention classes, all types of things based to improve your health and wellness. And then spirit, I like to think of in terms of how can you be more participative? How can you get involved within your village? Many of our members are also volunteers. So they're organizing a lot of these programs, and they're heavily involved in creating all types of activities. There's cultural activities, museums, art centers, that type of thing, and also just the social gatherings that are so critically important. Coffee club every week, happy hours. And yes, we did all those things within a village model, even during the pandemic. So you can see one example on this slide of where people are participating in person and then through Zoom. So to end my presentation, the village model is again another what I would call affordable alternative for housing. And I'll turn the baton back to you, Chelsea. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Lee. So we are going to move into the panel discussion. We're going to spend probably the next 15 minutes asking the panelists questions. I do have some questions I would like to ask them for on behalf of everyone, but if any of the attendees would like to add your own questions into the chat box, please feel free to do so. If we don't get to them during the panel discussion, we can discuss those during the breakout sessions. But we will monitor the chat box. So I'm going to pose my first question to John. It sounds like, John, that part of the Housing for Older Persons law allows families with children to live in some of the housing set aside for older persons 55 and over. Can you confirm that for me?
The way the Housing for Older Persons Act works is that 62 and older housing is exclusively 62 and older. And then the 55 and older provision is a little bit more complicated than it ever needed to be. But the writers of this legislation wanted to have lots of options for builders and owners of large multifamily complexes. So they said that for 55 and older housing, only one person need be 55 and older. and that if you had 100 units, you could just go under that law, and then you could have lots of people of different ages. But they also allow a lot of groups to say 55 and older and must be 50 to live here, or 55 and older and must be 45. And most take that option so that the housing becomes pretty segregated. There's also another option, is that you can decide on, out of 100 units, you might say, we want to reserve 20 exclusively for families with children. And in those 20, no one need be 55 and older. However, there are very few places that do that, because when the law got implemented and a lot of builders did that, there were some seniors who thought their advertising said senior housing. So they thought it was all going to be all senior housing, and then it wasn't. So they soon learned that they would not exercise that 20% option unless they weren't able to sell out, say, condominiums, and then they would exercise it. So there's a hodgepodge of units all over the country with different things. But in 2022, most 55 and older housing is segregated housing. It is at least 50 and over that you have to be to live there. And so those are some of the complications with the Housing for Older Persons Act. One other thing, and this is a good thing, I think, is that a lot of places that have been apartment complexes or condo complexes that were market rate have a lot of people my age and older, okay, that are living there, and they've lived there for 20, 25 years, and they want to convert to housing for older persons. It is very difficult. And that because those older houses are not accessible, and HUD would prefer all new senior housing be built with those 7 mobility features that are required for any complexes that have 4 or more units in them. So that's just a few other things about housing for older persons.
Thank you, John. Francis, can you talk a little bit more about the costs associated with Nesterly?
Sure. So hosts and guests alike can create their profiles for free if/when you are ready to move into a home share agreement. There's a one-time booking fee that depends on the length of the stay. So it's going to be somewhere between $95 and $195. When you compare that to a traditional security deposit, that's much more affordable. So that there's that one-time booking fee that goes to Nesterly. And there's also an ongoing service fee of 2.5%. And that helps to cover the payment processing and some of that ongoing customer support as well.
Great, thank you. It looks like we have a couple questions for Lee in the chat. The first one is from Carol. It says, villages here in Central Ohio are phenomenal, a wonderful program, but they are successful in neighborhoods that are higher socioeconomic populations. Does it work in neighborhoods that are struggling financially? How can clients afford the membership costs?
Thank you for the question. Villages are based on many different kinds of models. And it sounds like in Columbus, the membership model has a higher based membership fee, primarily to support the operational staff, whether that's an executive director, a part-time assistant. Many villages in the DC Mid-Atlantic area are what I would call totally volunteer driven. Many of those villages are in different kinds of income levels where there is no membership fee or it's set at $20. So there are different types of models that can be attractive for different kinds of communities. So again, I mentioned this is very community-based, grassroots-driven, and it depends on what community you're in terms of the membership fee. Also, some villages do a great deal of fundraising and other kinds of development activities, including grant writing, to support lower income members in that particular vicinity of the village. I know in DC, we had more than 150 scholarships that were offered to offset the cost of the membership dues. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Lee. I'm going to jump back to John. We heard you talk a little bit about the when the structures are built and the inspections that happen. And I'm just wondering if you can explain a little bit about why code enforcement and building inspectors do not have to check for compliance with the Fair Housing Act.
Unfortunately, when they wrote the Fair Housing Act and added the design and construction requirements in 1988, and then Ohio added them in 1992, neither law spoke to who was to cover compliance. It's the law just doesn't speak to it. And as a result, everyone is they're like, not my job. I've talked to building inspectors and they said, please do not advocate for that. We don't want anything more added to our plate. However, recently I did a presentation for the Ohio Association of Code Enforcement. And I told them this, they all get federal money, and that whether they believe that themselves, the code enforcers or the building inspectors are not responsible for it, it is my belief that the municipalities they work for are responsible to do that, because that they have to comply not only with the Fair Housing Act, but with Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. And people that have to comply with that law, their programs must be what we call programmatically accessible to people with disabilities. There is not a jurisdiction in the United States that does not have a person with a disability under the Fair Housing Act. And understand this, the definition of disability under the Fair Housing Act includes both temporary and permanent disabilities. So someone can break their leg and they can be out of commission for 3 months. Under the Fair Housing Act, they're considered disabled. They have a major impairment, unlike the ADA or the Social Security, which says they must be permanent, long-term disabilities. So I put in my slide to them, I said, someone in your municipality needs to figure out how you're going to get that information to all people who submit building plans for multifamily housing.
Thank you, John. Francis, can you talk about what is included in the background checks?
Yeah, this is a common question that I get when I go out to speak. And I have finally, I haven't quite memorized the full list yet, but I've got a handy dandy cheat sheet that I keep near me. So the background check that Nesterly runs includes national criminal search, sex offender registry, global watch list search, an address history search, and social security verification. So, you know, a lot of that boils down to making sure that somebody is who they say they really are, and just checking for anything else that might be of concern in somebody's background.
Okay. Thank you, Francis. There's another question in the chat box for Lee from Donna. For villages, are we at a point where we might have data suggesting how the presence of villages delays the need for someone to move into a assisted living facility?
That's a great question. And villages are doing more work on collecting survey data such as that. As part of the Village to Village Network, we've recently commissioned a study that will address this particular topic, Donna. So what we know anecdotally is it is helping and extending people's term within remaining in their own homes and communities. In DC, the Office on Aging, we worked very closely with them and the council and the Office on Aging were getting data statistics that we were impacting long-term care facilities and assisted living facilities. Again, that's not to say people might not be ready for that or retirement communities, but the village model is just another option for people to stay longer within their own homes. So the short answer is we're beginning to collect that data. Thank you for the question.
Great, thank you, Lee. So there is a question in the chat for John, and I'm going to pair it with another question that I had. The first one is, are there many apartments built out of compliance with the fair housing accessibility requirements? And do communities legally have to have a 504 coordinator on staff to handle things like ADA complaints, building plan reviews, and so forth?
Well, let's talk to the first one. So many jurisdictions are too small to have someone dedicated 40 hours a week to 504 issues. They just are. That doesn't relieve the jurisdiction of its responsibility to address them. And so if it becomes 1/10 or 1/100th of somebody's job, somewhere they should figure that out. You know, who has time to address that? Okay. And then and so we find many places have been built out of compliance. And what happens is that a lot of builders won't allow fair housing advocates or auditors in to see their buildings before they go to drywall or anything like that. And so they get built and they don't get audited until after the building is done. And then someone files a complaint, and then they go to mediation. And we have seen some places to be ordered to do up to $2.5 million in rehab. And and unfortunately, we saw one large complex near Dayton that was built, it was sold off to someone, and the new owners accrued that liability. And they had to run off to Texas to find these architects who were the ones that failed to build it. They did things like not all of them, but most of the one bedrooms had 2 steps up into the bedroom. So if you were a single person in a wheelchair and you wanted to rent that place, you'd have to flop yourself out of your wheelchair, crawl on your belly up into the bedroom, and maybe have another wheelchair up there. So those types of things happen, a lot. And so one of the things I didn't talk about in my overview, and I hope I can do it now or in the breakouts, is to talk about municipalities' responsibility to give their residents reasonable accommodations to municipal rules. And that kind of happens with this. Sometimes when we find places that are older and they weren't required to be accessible, that a person can ask their landlord for a reasonable accommodation. Can you put a ramp over the 2 steps up into the townhouse? Can we add some grad bars in the bathroom? And landlords, must allow them to do that so that, in fact, they can use and enjoy the homes like anyone else would be able to use and enjoy a home.
I guess we will go in order of the presenters order from the beginning of the meeting. So if someone from John's group would like to report back on your discussion.
We had a cozy group and I'm the only one left, so you're stuck with me. I will tell you our conversation with John was fascinating, and it was around this concept of reasonable accommodations. And he walked us through some examples that just brought it to life. And Tony was in that room. And in all honesty, his category is probably the biggest mystery to me. So I learned lots as I listened to Tony and John speak. John, do you have more to add here?
Well, the thing that, so I'm not sure, are we going to go to call to action at this time, or?
We will do that. We're going to kind of summarize what everybody talked about in the breakout groups, and then we will close with the call to action.
Okay, so in terms of the breakout room, we did focus on reasonable accommodations, and that's something that I just glossed over in my introduction. It is such an important aspect of fair housing laws, because the fair housing laws apply to people who either have a temporary or a permanent disability. And one of the things that I suggested that the people in my room do is to Google Santa Rosa, California, reasonable accommodation ordinance. And it is the best ordinance out there. If a jurisdiction was going to model after someone, it would be them. And anybody who has a problem with a zoning law or a procedure, whether it's for water service or trash pickup or anything like that, and they have a problem due to their disability, can call up Santa Rosa, California, and they help them solve the problem. And they have staff that have been trained to do that, and really helps them comply with Section 504's mandate to make their programs accessible to people with disabilities. And this, of course, helps everyone, because whether you're 65 or 25, you can get a broken leg and have a problem and have, it could be hard to get your trash out on a Monday morning, and to get some people to help you with the city's help, if you don't have somebody else, or to solve the problem, is a really great step up, that all residents who have been coming out of the pandemic feeling somewhat isolated, if they could have that connection with their cities.
Thank you, John. The next group would be for Francis. The first thing Francis touched on was one challenge that they've had in getting the Nesterly going in Central Ohio, and it has been kind of what she referred to as the chicken and the egg situation. You need enough hosts and, a variety of personalities, kind of another layer into that, in order to make it work. And then you also need enough guests. So not having enough hosts has been a challenge. And then also not having enough guests for, pairing people. This is probably due to the fact that they launched Nesterly in fall of 2019. And we all know what happened soon after that. So that has kind of been their challenge in getting Nesterly going in Central Ohio. We talked about the structure of Nesterly and how a community would get that going. And it's kind of like if you made a triangle, Nesterly would be at the top, and then you would have a middleman in for Central Ohio. COAAA is the middleman between the hosts and the guests in Nesterly. For the city of Boston, it was actually the mayor of Boston, and the city was the middleman between hosts and guests in Nesterly and getting that going. We had some questions about what the typical hosts and guests are, and whether there is an age requirement. And the only age requirement is that each party must be at least 18. And there was a question in our group as to whether the host can specify the age. There isn't anything about specifying the age of your guest, but you can kind of outline what your ideal guest would be if you were a host. And setting up a contract with Nesterly, Francis said that COAAA is on a 2-year contract that they actually just renewed. So that would be kind of incorporated in the structure of how Nesterly would get started in a new community. But that's kind of what our group talked about. So we can turn it over to Lee's group now.
Are you going to say something, Lee? Right, jump in.
I'll let you go ahead and take it over, Tim. Thank you for doing this.
Sure, you can backfill me. It was very interesting talking about the village concept. And we talked about, what I think our initial thoughts were, apartments or homes, but also buildings that themselves that are senior dedicated, that could be a village. And another key area was about delaying that entry into long-term care. And Lee's group has a study that's advancing on that to get the numbers on it. But from an anecdotal standpoint, it seems like something that would help people in terms of they need help when they came back from a medical event, or they just need help with daily chores or socialization or getting someplace. So it also, we got into volunteers. So are the volunteers necessarily all from the community? And there's opportunities for AmeriCorps volunteers and for United Way volunteers to participate in this. And again, they tend to be younger age, so it kind of drives some of the intergenerational flavor to it as well. So volunteers could come within and without, and it's kind of a win-win, in that way. What I didn't know was, if I got this right, is all the villages are 501(c)(3)s, or they're moving towards that if they aren't. So they're all nonprofits, and there's a variety of ways that they do membership. But the more volunteers they have, it's like anything. If they're all volunteer run, then there's not a need for membership. If it isn't, there's membership, but it's usually fairly nominal. I think I heard $20 a month as a number. So it was very interesting, but there's really a lot of questions about other agencies that might be involved as well. And like age-friendly areas. I'm in Cleveland, so age-friendly Cleveland, and just kind of figure out who's already involved in this. But that's kind of making sure we understood, revisiting some of the points.
Great. Thank you. Before we turn it over to Noreen to close out our time today, we want to give the panelists one last chance to present their call to action to the attendees. So John, we'll start with you.
No matter where you live, some jurisdiction has to do a fair housing plan. And those 5-year fair housing plans must be added to the consolidated planning process. And so this isn't something that is not required, it is required. Okay, so it's not a voluntary thing. And so a place like Yellow Springs, Ohio, village of 4,000, you would go to the county. Okay, if you're a city that's 50,000 or more, that's a entitlement community, you would do your own, or do like Dayton, Montgomery County, and the city of Kettering, and those three go together and do a regional fair housing plan. Those plans are partially based on a research tool that is used to develop the plan, and it's called an analysis of impediments to fair housing. And I'm conducting one of those right now. And in the county of Montgomery County, and I'm going all over the county doing focus groups, and we're recording those, and those recordings are all being added to this research study. We also have a survey online, and we are doing interviews with stakeholders. And you should call up your jurisdictions, find out when they're doing their fair housing plan, their analysis of impediments to fair housing, and participate. And we do focus groups with older people, and we do focus groups with African Americans and with other minority groups, with women's groups. And so we do it with younger people and students, and everyone's voice needs to be heard to become a part of that plan. And that's where you can ask for things like the visitability program, the source of income protection, adding a reasonable accommodation ordinance or procedure to your jurisdiction's city or county processes. So if you want to have your elected officials make a plan that has meaningful actions with material outcomes, that's where you do it, is in the analysis of impediments to fair housing.
All right. Thank you, John. Francis, I will turn it over to you for your call to action for the group.
Yeah, my call to action is very simple. I would love for everybody to just talk about home sharing with your friends and family. If you're in Central Ohio, I would love for you to specifically talk about Nesterly, Central Ohio. But there is, home sharing in and of itself is not a new idea. The more that I have been getting back out into talking to different community groups, I end up hearing from a lot of people, that they had done some home sharing before, that in decades past, they did some home sharing, but they were responding to an ad in a newspaper, or they heard about someone from their church and they were like, I wish that there was something like Nesterly that just had some additional security and support that's built into it. So in Central Ohio, we have that now. And so we would love for people to use it. And then the other thing that I would just like to, this isn't really related to my topic specifically, but I'm reading a great book that I think would be pertinent to the work that everybody's doing here. If you haven't heard of it, it's called Breaking the Age Code by Dr. Becca Levy. The subtitle is How Your Beliefs About Aging Determine How Long and How Well You Live. Really phenomenal read. It draws on lots of great research, and I think is directly correlated to the work that we're all doing every day. So have to give that a little plug as well.
Thank you, Francis and Lee.
Well, I want to second the book recommendation, Breaking the Aging Code. It's an excellent resource. So Francis, thanks for mentioning that. I just want to say aging in place has never been more important. During COVID, it really shined a bright light on communities, community resources, and neighbors helping neighbors. So if you are interested in thinking about starting a village, talking to your neighbors and friends about one, I encourage you to go to the Village to Village Network, the homepage. There is a place on there that says, what is a village? And you'll start to bring up resources in terms to think about how to create one. And I think Donna put the link in the chat box. Also, you could contact me directly, or you can email v2v@the v2vnetwork.org. And we'll put that in the link as well in the chat room. So I want to thank you all. The villages survived COVID. They not only survived, but they thrived during the COVID pandemic. And you can see activities continued. Especially programming, because another epidemic that's occurring in our country is social isolation and loneliness, and the impact it has on older adults and their physical health. You may have heard this statistic, which still amazes me, that the impact of social isolation and loneliness is equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So if you think about that, what the village model offers is that wealth of programming, those social connections, whether it's a phone tree activity, a walking buddy, they really bring that to the older adult community. So I encourage you to think about the village movement. It is growing, and hopefully it'll continue to grow, especially in the Midwest and in Ohio. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. Thank you to all of our presenters and panelists today. I'm going to turn it over to Noreen so she can round out our meeting today.
I do want to thank everybody for making this possible. Chelsea and Donna, especially for doing the heavy lifting, the organizing, to John and Lee and Francis for giving us really valuable content and starting what I think are additional conversations along these lines. We will follow up. We'll send out an email with all the links and information that have been shared here today, and contact information for each other so that you can continue your conversations offline. But just thanks to everybody for making today possible.
Many thanks to Noreen Willhelm and the Ohio leaders of Encore and Age-Friendly Initiatives for allowing us to utilize their program for our podcast today. And thank you to the panel members, Francis Krumholtz, John Zimmerman, and Lee Sempelis, for allowing us to tape their presentations. Listeners, thank you for joining us, and don't forget to check out our show notes for contact information as well as resources on our website. That website address is lookingforwardourway.com. We're looking forward to hearing your feedback on this and any other of our podcast episodes.